Welcome, everyone, to episode 338 of Just Joshing. I am your host, Joshua Pentolaresco. I write stuff in podcast 2 today. I had an amazing opportunity come my way this week. I was originally going to have Bryce Vizier as my guest here because continue Kickstarter week. That will continue next week. He'll be on this time next week. So I got the opportunity to interview a video game company, Vox Pop Games. Mark Anthony Rodriguez, COO, reached out to me, and I got to interview him and Charles Yu, who's the CEO of the company. And we have this really, really cool, amazing conversation about their platform and about games in general. Charles is one of the most passionate dudes when it comes to video games I've ever talked to. He's amazing. He's really into what he's doing. Amazing human being. Mark Anthony Rodriguez played a major role in some of the games I played in when I was a kid. So this was an awesome conversation. I learned so much doing this. I appreciate both of them being on the show. So guys, thank you very much. What VoxPop did come to do, though, was they came to advertise their new platform, which I'm going to read about right now. So VoxPop Games is a new peer-to-peer, P2P independent and distribution and game development platform. Hashtag Every Voice Matters. The VoxPop Games platform is designed to primarily benefit independent game developers, Let's Players, and video game streaming personalities, and has already onboarded a slew of amazing independent games and online content creators to the platform that's gearing up for a beta launch this spring. I'm, like I said, I'm chatting with Charles Yu and Anthony Rodriguez, so we're just going to get into that conversation now and then go from there. All right?
This episode of Just Joshing is sponsored by Indie Imprint. Indie Imprint supports creators by creators. Whether you are writing a book or creating a video game, Indie Imprint works with its clients to produce, edit, and present their projects to the world. For more information, check out their website at www.indieimprint.com.
Okay, so basically, I'd always wanted to be an indie game dev. And I went to study game design in college. Right? The reason I wanted to be an indie game dev is because I wanted to be able to have a sort of a hand in all aspects of game design. Whereas if you were to get a job in the AAA industry, you have to be incredibly specialized. I'm not exaggerating about the one guy who wrote the shader for like Nathan Drake's Sweat and Skin and stuff, right? That's like actually.
No. You know, I believe it. I'm getting into the film industry out here. I'm trying to, and it's all specialized. It's just the nature of the beast.
Yes, exactly. And because of the nature of game design work these days, you'd better be like the best dang shader writer in the entire industry if you want to keep working at that job, right? So. That's why I wanted to go into independent game design instead. And luckily enough, a lot of my professors actually were independent game designers themselves, people that I sort of idolized, right? And it was all going great until senior year when one of my professors challenged us to guess how much money he had made in the 5 years leading up to his professorship. And the answer was $15,000, which is a bit of a dream crusher. But that got me to thinking why it was so hard to make a living as an indie dev. Sorry.
No worries.
Because when you look at the wider trends for the games industry and just how much money indie games are worth, you'd be surprised to hear that they're closing in on almost $3 billion annually. You're over $1.5 billion for Steam alone, right? It's easy to look at that and wonder, like, where's all the money going, right? And the answer I've arrived at is indie games are very polarized. It's because independent developers, most of them don't really have a marketing budget. And a lot of devs don't really have a go-to market strategy besides put their game on Steam and pray.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah, Steam is so, like, if we're looking at it, Steam is in probably 1 in 5 homes. I've heard some estimation, so it's a global thing. It's 700 million PCs in the world, not counting like MacBooks and Linux boxes.
Right, but
however people play.
Right, but of course, putting your game on Steam by itself isn't enough to promote your game. Most people don't look at the newest games that arrive on Steam, and you'll be on there for like a millisecond anyway. If you want to pay for featured content, the cost varies depending on when you want it in the year, but it can be thousands of dollars a day, even, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the solution I arrived at was that we needed to create a system that has a profit-sharing business model, right? That way, developers can continue to drive attention to their games and market their games even when they don't actually have any money up front to spend on advertising. So the idea is essentially that developers can section off a percentage of their revenue, which is determined entirely by them, by the way, and then they can share that revenue with anybody who helps drive sales to their game. Essentially, you can think of this as a tool that people can use to approach influencers and online personalities and say, hey, listen, you help drive attention to my game, and we can help each other out. We can partner up.
It's actually an old school sales tactic, is what that is. It makes sense though. It's almost like it's almost like it's not exactly the same model, but what you've kind of done is like, okay, we need you to draw a crowd to let us know that this game is out there, and if you do that, you make X amount of dollars as a thank you. If you don't, well, you get what you get, and that's all there is to it.
Well, yeah, you think about it this way. A lot of these content creators are in the hundreds of thousands of followers and user groups. In the lower tier, I want to say, a couple thousand here and there. There's even some that have like very, very loyal audiences in the hundreds. So if we're drawing attention in every format across the board, everyone's going to benefit. Content creators are not just going to feel like they're doing free work. A lot of the times these, YouTubers and Twitch streamers and mixers are just, propagating these huge, publicly already, culturally impactful pieces of art, Fortnites and, Call of Duty and all these other big properties. And a lot of these indie games get, like Charles mentioned, they just get lost in the shuffle. It's a millisecond in terms of content strategy. So that's where we come in.
And the reason why having a platform like this in the middle is a good idea is because if you want to engage someone at that level without a platform in place, if you're the streamer or influencer or whoever else, right, you need to trust that the developer isn't going to shortchange you, that they're going to be honest, that they're going to give you what you're worth, right? And if you're the developer, you need to somehow acquire the accounting skill and the analytics necessary to determine how much each of the people you're working with is worth. And the more people you work with, the exponentially more time it's going to take to actually do that, even if you had the skill necessary. And so a platform like this just really automates and streamlines the process.
So basically, you've created a process to help indie games kind of maximize their value. Is that basically to sum it up?
Yeah, that's a good way to think of it. And of course, many streaming channels, especially when you look at streaming channels that focus on indie games, they tend to not be huge. The biggest streamers generally focus on big games like Fortnite and Hearthstone are the two most popular.
Yes.
And other free-to-play games or competitive games, right? Indie game channels are comparatively much smaller. But what they can get from a platform like this is basically another revenue stream to help keep their channels afloat, even though they might not see the same huge numbers as the biggest channels.
It doesn't, like, okay, so basically you're about niche, you're about niche, like helping people establish themselves in their niches.
So I want to sort of jump in and call it boutique. This is a boutique indie centric focus for streamers, content creators, designers, developers, artists to put their art forth. And we're not trying to. We know the big leagues. We know I've had my entire career in the big leagues trying to already market the marketable. It's already there's only so much you could do with like a Grand Theft Auto and a Street Fighter game. Those are properties that I worked in my career. So it's like, we got to change the focus. We have to change the dynamic, and we have to be a little bit more focused on the artistry that pretty much every single top tier game is pulling from the ideas and artistry of these independent games that are just being not really talked about, not really spotlighted for the community.
Well, it makes sense too on a bigger scale too. You don't want. It's great having a big mega franchise. You mentioned Hearthstone, Street Fighter, and it's great that those things exist. But the thing is, you always have to. At some point, you have to invest in people coming up. Because even though not every single one of them is going to have another hit game, you're not going to find that hit unless you give people the opportunity to show what's out there. Because things, I mean, it's you want to encourage things to catch on in a way that is organic and natural. And so you have another hit. Because the more properties that are big that are out there, the more Street Fighters that are out there, the more Hearthstones that are out there, the more Grand Theft Autos that are out there, the better it is for the video game industry, because that's another property you can work on. It's another property that you can develop, and also it encourages people like you guys that want to develop an indie developing kind of platform to keep doing it, because then anything may become the next big thing, and that's a good thing, I think, for every industry.
Yeah, exactly. And far from just in the creation of new IPs, a lot of ideas that are commonplace in the AAA game industry actually originate from independent developers. Mm-hmm. Big studios tend to copy proven formulas because obviously they're investing a lot more money into something, so they're usually more risk adverse. But a good, easily visible example is the Battle Royale, right? Everyone plays Fortnite, but Fortnite didn't ship with the Battle Royale mode. They copied that from PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, right?
Yeah, the PUBG is the proto, where everyone forgets, and Fortnite is the realization and the continuation of the sort of pop culture phenomenon that it is now. It's PUBG on cotton candy.
PUBG on cotton candy. I like that. I like that. It's basically what you're saying is Fortnite's junk food.
No, we're not hating.
I'm teasing you guys. I'm not.
It's not junk food. Let's just say it's some. I enjoy it. I'm a player. It's something. It's artistry.
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely. No. In all seriousness,
I'm headed to the cotton candy stand first when I get to the.
There's nothing wrong with that, man. Cotton candy has its place in the world. It totally does. No, I just bring this up because I just mentioned it like this. Well, I mean, the idea I think of every art form, not just games, but every art form, no matter what it is I think one of the biggest challenges developers have is figuring out their formula, who they are as designers, gamers, and how to best broadcast that message. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the best way to put things is that there are underserved communities throughout all of media.
Yep.
And we're trying to put forth an attitude, a platform, a voice. Like in Vox Pop, it's voice of the people. We're trying to put every single partner that we have on our platform's property at the forefront of our platform. We're not trying to bury them. We're trying to promote them. We're trying to do as much for outreach for them. We were at PAX East this past weekend, which was amazing to have a bunch of our partners on the show floor with branding and with a whole bunch of different specs for future games and titles that they want to see on the platform. So that's really, really, truly a testament to what we're trying to do.
No, that's awesome.
And yeah. Oh.
No, just go jump right in. I just said that was awesome. I'm here to look pretty. So go ahead.
And one thing I'd like to add to that is actually while we were on the show floor, we got a chance to speak to a couple schools and educational organizations as well that aren't universities, such as Boston Postmortem. And student outreach is one of those things that we want to hope to do in the future because a lot of the craziest ideas and newest trends you get from students. They do things that maybe aren't the most logical from a market analysis standpoint because nobody told them they shouldn't do it.
Sometimes that's the best power because it's
that. Oh.
I'll finish my thought and I'll go back to you. One of the biggest things I've learned in life is sometimes I have to teach myself how to unlearn something because that knowledge has created a bias. When you don't know anything, you're not afraid of anything and you just go for it, even if it doesn't necessarily go with the rules, right? But because you're coming at it from a completely different perspective, it works.
And actually, that was exactly the point that I was getting at earlier when I was speaking. You know, it's not an indictment of AAA games, of course, but usually independent games is the proving ground for a lot of these new innovations because AAA games generally can't take those kinds of risks. So even if you're not invested in indie games at all as a gamer, you should still want indie devs to succeed. Because it's ultimately those people who are going to be injecting new ideas into the medium.
Yes. Well, it's necessarily, if you don't have new things growing and developing over time, you're going to kill your industry. I mean, I love Street Fighter. I'm a big Street Fighter guy. But you know what? At some point, they're going to have to move away from Ryu's Hurricane Kick and Hadouken and introduce something new and different into the franchise just to change up the pace and the feel. And then when you bring him back, it becomes special again, right? Because if you don't bring new stuff in, it's just going to be the same game. And yeah, I'll appeal to a certain group of people all the time. But the last thing the video game industry wants to become is the comic book industry, which is you get so caught in its own continuity, it never does anything new.
Yeah, it's a lot of regurgitation in that medium, or like varianting, or just going sideways, but not really ever out of pocket. I feel like this medium and this sort of everything art that's found in games. It gives a lot of leeway to experimentation. I'm a big scientific method guy, so doing a lot of trial and error is pretty much the only way I live my entire life. So
that's a good life philosophy in general, anyway. I think.
Well, yeah, that's what I graduated. I wanted Charles to finish up the spec about starting the establishment, but before I jump in, because I'm relatively early to the company, but we've done a lot in the short time frame that I've been a part of it.
All right, so Charles, continue.
To be honest, I don't quite remember where I thought.
So you said
on a bit of a tangent.
That's the nature of the pod. It's the nature of the pod. It's pretty much getting into the inception of the platform, and then from there, I think it's a pivot to me, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess I'll just pick up from. Okay, so. I'm really sorry.
No, don't be sorry. Don't be sorry.
We talked about. Oh yes, we were talking about marketing games, right? And how most independent developers don't have the money to market their games, right? Especially compared to AAA games, and that also bleeds into indie streamers who don't get as much audience as these other games, which are much more visible, right? So we want to link these two sides of the ecosystem and help people partner up, and that's really where the original idea for the platform came from, and where we hope to go from there once we have a platform set up is a number of other tools to help independent game designers. One that I believe we mentioned to you before coming out of this podcast was the micro investment engine, which I can get into a little later. But yes, when it comes to the why of starting this company, it's entirely due to my love for this space, frankly my desire to enter this space, and sort of the cold, harsh realities I hit once I got here.
Well, necessity is the mother of invention, right? So you want to make a living doing what you love, and I think a lot of people can relate to that, man.
Our chairman loves to say, "No one chooses to become an entrepreneur." The secret sauce for entrepreneurship is always desperation.
Yes, there's definitely some truth to that. So then, I guess we should go down to the other half of this equation. So how did you get involved?
So my estimation of things is the way I saw it. It's a LinkedIn connection. Charles and I had a bunch of mutually sort of overlaid connects. I saw a listing. I was a little bit of background of me. Short elevator pitch. I've had about 15 years in the digital entertainment industry in all sorts of varying roles. Middle management, upper middle management, full-time quality assurance, everything up the rung and up the ladder. I graduated in 2005 with a philosophy degree, not anywhere close to Charles's NYU Game Center Tisch degree, but my background is more of the philosophical nature, tooth and nail trying to get into the games industry. So similar to Charles in pretty much every scope, except for mine is from the purely philosophical, big picture ideas, man, where, okay, I'm going to graduate now, let's go to California, let's break into the industry, let's bartend, let's do what we can to intern, and let's get into a big studio. I was fortunate enough to apply on my first go-round at Rockstar Games headquarters in New York City. There I met a huge, impactful personality in Lance Williams. He was one of the main operations heads there for quality assurance. Rockstar headquarters, everyone likes to think that it's in Edinburgh, Scotland. That's where the main dev house is. That's where North is. That's where everything is created. That's the art house, the wheelhouse. The main headquarters is in New York, downtown in Soho. So I applied. There was about 250 other applicants. I applied with my, shot in the dark. Here's why I want to join your company. My main spec was my favorite game. My favorite game, hands down, is system. So it's the Super Entertainment System. That by and large is my, talking point that got my foot in the door at Rockstar. I beat out, like I said, over 200 applicants to then join the core test team as a game analyst. So game analyst is an everyman job. It's part QA, it's part production, it's part voiceover, it's part everything. It's just a generalized term, game analyst. So you start from the bottom rung and you work there for 5 years. 5.5 years, you're growing, you're learning, you're putting out these amazing pieces of art. Everything between 2005 and 2010 has my voice, my wife's voice, my family's embedded in the pedestrian talk and voiceovers. So it's a lot of, I want to say a lot of indie inspiration from a huge big name studio. This secret sauce that everyone wants to talk about is pretty much the souls of everyone that is working there consistently. So 5 years at Rockstar go by. I move on to then join the Capcom USA branch. So that's pretty much all of the IPs that are being run out of the office in San Mateo, California. It's a suburb of San Francisco. So my wife and I pack our stuff, travel across the country, drive with our dog, cross the Grand Canyon, go through all these, see 32 of the 50 continental states, arrive in Capcom, do another bid there. I like to see these as not prison terms, but big chunks of achievement points in my life. I went on to Capcom to do Street Fighter 4, Cross Tekken, Resident Evil properties. We worked to expand the Capcom Vancouver brand that did Dead Rising series. And then I finished up my tenure there by moving back to New York and working for Major League Baseball and video streaming. So video streaming is the huge thing now. Everyone has their own a la carte platform now. That thing wasn't around. That sort of systemic sort of off-branching and a la carte, at your own expense, Netflixing of things. It wasn't around not even 3-4 years ago. Now every system has a platform. CBS for Showtime, HBO Time Warner. MLB branched off their division and they sold off their tech division for streaming to Disney. And my last tenure in a huge corporation was with Disney streaming services to help bring forth the Disney Plus property.
Wow.
With that, that's my sort of last caveat into 15 years, 5, 10, 15. And I needed a detox, a tremendous amount of detox. In 2015, I did a TEDx about the gamification of life. It's available on,
I've seen that. Oh wow.
Yeah, that's my sort of caveat into, public speaking and trying to get all of the different ideas that I have about our gamified world, because we're all living in some sort of perpetual ARG, and we're trying to get things going. Right now, my mission, along with Charles, is to get this platform launched and get this indie-centric boutique development and distribution service off the ground and running. That's what we're here to sort of propagate. We're trying to get as much steam, not steam. That's a bad pun. We're trying to get as much force and voices behind us, so that we can go ahead and usher in a sort of new era of indie-centric innovation. And hopefully, we like to talk about AAA, what separates AAA. We're going to have AAA games on our platform. They just might be in the guise of an independent studio. Most of the things that we're considering indie now can go for a $40 to $60 markup. It's all about pricing, and it's all about optics. If we want to look at something from different perspectives, Charles has a great analogy. I'll let him kick in, but like looking at CD Projekt now, and that's an indie studio, and they're doing these huge properties with Witcher and with Cyberpunk 2077. That it's very hard to distinguish what is indie, what is independent.
So, I think what Mark was saying is that just because studios might be independent, but they still put out, they can still put out quality on par with AAA studios. It's not that we're looking to put, Activision's games on our platform or whatever. I just want to make sure there's no confusion there.
Fair enough.
But even when it comes to CD Projekt, I think there might have been a little confusion between me and Mark. When I brought up CD Projekt, it was to point out that while many people consider CD Projekt an independent studio, they have the marketing spend. CD Projekt is a company of 200 people. They get subsidies directly from, the government, and I think the marketing budget on Witcher 3 was $80 million, right? So while they might strictly be an indie studio in the biggest sense, the kind of people we want to lift up are people who would struggle against bodies like that, right? So yes, it is true. There are independent studios that can sort of really go toe-to-toe with AAA industries, but that does lead to... we're not here to quibble over definitions, right? We want to help out whoever's struggling and make sure that they can reach their audience.
Okay, so this is, I think, where I'm going to go. I want both your takes on this one. So it seems to me that what's happening is, and this is true of video games, this is true with books and other things, it's the fact that right now that there's a lot more room. It's almost like everything has kind of gone back to the Wild West a little bit, because the old ways of doing things, for whatever reasons, they're not working like they were. I know video games is still a very lucrative industry, but there's a lot more room, more and more, because of all the tools that are available these days for people to develop things on their own, and it's becoming a more common thing. So what you're trying to do then essentially is to unite that, where people have a platform to show just what people are doing. Am I summing that up perfectly?
Yes, for the most part.
Okay.
So yeah, it is true. Independent development is sort of accelerating. It's definitely much more in the popular consciousness, right? And what that also means is a lot of people might not necessarily be acquainted with the reality of trying to work and market in games, right? And what we want to do is unite everybody, make sure that everybody can reach the platform they need to, make sure everyone has the tools they need to promote, and in general make it easier to make a stable living as an indie dev. However, when it comes to what you were saying about it being the Wild West, I think it's important to talk about perception versus reality.
And that's fair.
So, a good example of that is actually entrepreneurship, right? a lot of people think we're in a sort of golden age for entrepreneurs because you see all these new startups get visibility, and they're always promoting on social media, right? Because it's easy to think that it's better for entrepreneurs now than it ever was. The fact of the matter is, fewer new businesses are being started now than any time in U.S. history since the 1970s.
Wow. I did not know that.
The advent of the internet, we are at the lowest point ever for the new startups and small businesses, right? Because big business sort of swallows up all of that, right? And they kind of salt the earth a little bit almost, right? But that's not what people's perception is, right? And when it comes to video games, that is very much the same thing. A lot of people have this perception that things there's going to be much more experimentation and diversity in video games, right? But, the big gaming conglomerates, they're still holding steady, the cash cows are pretty much still cash cows. And I think maybe one of the best examples, the most disheartening examples for me personally is in the wake of, do you remember the controversy surrounding Blitzchung with Activision Blizzard?
Yes, a little bit. Just elaborate on a little bit, but just for my audience, because not everybody here is in the gaming, but I do recall it a little bit.
Yes. So Activision Blizzard had their biggest Hearthstone tournament ever, right? And the winner, Blitzchung, during the victory interview, he expressed support for the protesters in Hong Kong, right? Immediately, they cut the feed, they revoked his winnings, they banned him from the game, they fired the two people who interviewed him, even though they were just doing their... And then they issued an official apology to Chinese viewers. And there was a huge backlash against it, right? A bunch of people showed up to protest at the next BlizzCon dressed as Winnie the Pooh. There were a lot of calls to delete accounts and calls for boycotts. Activision Blizzard's stock took a small dip in the wake of it, and 2 months later they're fine. They made it all back. Nothing changed. Nobody canceled their Battle.net account.
Yeah, business as usual. It's sort of hard to stop that train from derailing by any means, unless
everyone was jonesing to buy the next Call of Duty, right?
Yeah.
And my point is, while there is definitely more indie development, while it's undeniable that indie games are making more money now than the past, right? That much is true. It's been explosive growth, frankly. And while it is true that people are slowly tiring of business as usual for the AAA games industry, I think that the reality is a lot less dramatic than what people's perception is. It's a small shift. It's a slow shift. It's not the Wild West yet. There's no earthquakes yet. You know what I mean?
No, I get you.
But what we want to do is we want to accelerate that slow change, right? We want to make it more visible to people that there is an alternative. I think that when it comes to a lot of social change in a capitalist economy, right? A lot of it sometimes can boil down to just the visibility of alternatives, right? Mm-hmm. And if you don't see it, it can be easy to feel like there is no alternate course of action. What we want to do is sort of enhance visibility for independent developers. Because one of the games that did go viral in the wake of the Activision Blizzard controversy was the Untitled Goose Game. And on Reddit, at least, many people were explicitly promoting that as an alternative. And
that's one of my key turn points for joining up. I was telling Charles over the week, we're not trying to focus on heavy controversy, heavy-handed political stances. It's more about artistry being at the forefront of every social change. So if we're looking at it from every shift in, political spectrum, religion, every sort of caveat of pop culture, art is what drives the majority of discourse. So we're talking about huge fundamental changes being seen in a Goose Game that viralizes across the. It's just hijinks. It's madcap hijinks that sort of distracts us from everyday life and sort of shifts the shift that Charles had mentioned, the shift in sort of optics and trying to make sure that people understand that this is games. This is truly about video games. It's about artistry and having fun at the end of it. So that's my sort of my take on that. In terms of your point, Josh, about the Wild West, I agree with you to an extent in the main sense that if we're talking about Wild West where everyone's out there and everyone's able to do what they want, I go back to content strategy. There's a waterfall every second right now as we're talking of content being perpetuated throughout the world. So there is no competition for us. Neither is there competition for every other piece of content that's going out. It's just the attention span of everyone that we're vying for throughout history and time. We're trying to get a little speck of attention onto a very, very great cause, and that's just trying to put forth amazing artists and developers and streaming content creators and partners. That's that little Venn diagram of like overlapping of these two ecosystems, and that's where Vox Pop meets in the middle with everyone.
Which is a very cool undertaking, and to be perfectly honest, it's going to be a big crusade. I mean, because I think if anything, if this gets really successful, your problem is going to be the sheer amount of demand for it. Because again, there are thousands of games released on a regular basis, and keeping up with all of that's impossible. I've said this in my show in the past. The demand for content is infinite, and whether it's games, literature, any kind of piece of art you imagine. The challenge is, as most aptly say, was getting attention on these things in a way that people can see it. Because it's almost like white noise. It's out there, and now I could release a book, you guys could release a game, somebody else could release a page, and then you multiply that by like 1 million. Well, who's noticing? Because it's just one big giant waterfall, as I think is the apt way to put it. But I want to go here first. Gaming as art. I think games, honestly, when you get right down to it, is probably one of the most underrated forms of art out there. Because it's also one of the most, I think what makes games in particular really special is they're interactive. The player creates the user experience. So what I'm asking is, where did you guys find your love for games? Like, what game said to you, I want to do this for my life?
Love of games in general, or love of games as art?
Both, actually. We'll go both.
Well, I mean, I grew up on Pokemon, man. When I was a kid, I had like a really messed up job. So I spent every other week in the dentist's office, and they had a bunch of Game Boy Colors, right? And everyone was always fighting over Pokemon Crystal, because that was like the newest one. And so Pokemon Blue was basically free, and I got to play through the whole thing just from my waiting room visits. That's definitely where my love of games started.
Yeah.
When it comes to first taking games seriously as art, there are a lot of games that people tend to bring up. I think Shadow of the Colossus is probably the most common.
Beautiful game. Beautiful game.
But honestly, the game that did it for me was this like Flash game. You can still find it for free online, called Every Day the Same Dream. And what amazed me about that game was the way it sort of takes side-scrolling mechanics and turns them against you, right? Because as gamers, we sort of get used to, for lack of a better term, a sort of the language around how genres are supposed to work, right? And so for a side-scrolling adventure game, what you're supposed to do is move right and interact with everything you can on the way out, right? And in Every Day the Same Dream, if you do that, all that happens is you get dressed, you go to work, you get stuck in traffic, and then you wake up in bed again, right? And that will keep happening as long as you keep doing it, right? And you win the game. It's debatable whether you actually win it or not, I guess. The game ends, right? Once you find various different ways to sort of rebel against the formula, right? And the moment that clicked for me, was amazing, right? Like, and it's so simple. Like, one of them is just walk left, right? Like, one of them is once you get down to street level, walk left instead of right.
That's our gamified life, Charles. You're describing.
It's weird to say that, right? Because it sounds so simple, but I didn't think to do that for the first 3 go-arounds that I did on this everyday the same thing.
I'd say it's because of simplicity. Like for me, believe it or not, the answer. I'll jump in and we'll go to Mark. For me, the answer is Tetris. Oddly, for a very similar reason, it's so simplistic. Right? It's just a simple part of putting blocks together and make it. It just felt good to do. And I realized that whoever came up with it was a genius because it's just something so simple, so commonplace. Essentially, it's algorithms, basically, on a small scale. It's a genius game, and sounds like Every Day the Same Dream. It has that similar kind of simplicity.
Yeah, in a way. But what I loved about it was the way it sort of played with and broke expectations, right? Because once you get used to playing games, you get used to playing them in a certain way. And this game sort of was the first one that challenged me to think critically about why I expected a game to play this way. Because it didn't tell me, there's no objective marker. Why did I expect that I was supposed to walk right the entire time? That's because I've been playing games my whole life, right? And it was the game that opened my eyes to the idea of playing with genre and playing with interactivity and using the interactivity itself as a story element. I'll shut up now. I could talk about that all day.
No, that's okay. We might go down that route. Don't worry about it.
No, yeah, we're approaching the 40-minute mark, and we're just cooking. Now we're cooking with fire.
Well, if you want me to give you sort of the college lecture about this, I would love to.
We're gonna get you. We're gonna get you on the next TEDx, Charles. Once the platform is live, Charles is going TEDx NYU. That's the spec. Let's do it.
Actually, so Charles, I will have a follow-up question for you in a minute. We'll get to Mark first. We'll get Mark to answer, and then we'll come back because I do have a good follow-up for you. So, Mark, what was it for you?
So I go into it heavy with my talk, but the gist of it, as you guys know, I said earlier, my favorite game is Super Punch-Out for the SNES. That was the I guess the key moment in my life, not necessarily finding out about art, but knowing that I wanted to be in the video game industry in general. I didn't study towards that. I consider myself like a zennial, like the cusp of millennial. Like, I graduated in the year 2000 from high school. So if I go back through my history, my parents drove me to invest in the artwork of gaming. Like, not many parents would be pushing this medium on their child. A lot of parents, a lot of my classmates, their parents were like adversely against it. They were hating every single moment. It was a waste of time. It was this sort of nerd or soft boy medium where everyone's going out and playing baseball, football, basketball, running, track, all this stuff. I was able to do that. I'm capable of doing that. I love swimming and track. But my day-to-day was go home, wake up, go to class, finish class, do homework as fast and as efficiently as possible so I could get to gaming. So Super Punch-Out is the de facto for me artwork wise. I love pixel art. A lot of the games that we're featuring on the platform beta launch are pixel oriented. We have a bunch of 3D games. We have a bunch of unannounced partners. But a lot of things that we're doing is a lot of pixelated art that I feel is the crux of the ideas where you're able to do a lot more with a lot less. So my father is 35 years in the electrical union. He got us, myself, my brother, a Pong set. He got it on a swap meet in Long Island one weekend. He came home with this set. He got us ColecoVision. He got us the Atari 2600, the 1600. So I've had every single mainstay console home entertainment system with me throughout my entire, adolescent youth into adulthood. So finding that sort of branching path into what art is, I guess the key, door opening or eye opening experience for me was the demo disc for the PlayStation 2. And no one's going to talk about this, I feel, but that is one of the most perfect compilations of what high art is. You had Battle Arena Toshinden, you had Jumpin' Flash, you had early Metal Gear Solid, all in one. You had early Tekken, it was prototype, pre-alpha Tekken on it. And this, 5-disc compilation of what a sampling platter is, pretty much solidified in my core DNA that gaming was going to be my entire life for the rest of my life in one way, shape, or form. Granted, I went off for the past, 4.5 years to do video streaming services and building that out. But it was always gaming centric. Like how are we going to gamify the end user to use these specific features in this streaming service? How are they going to interact with the UI, how to change channels, how to jump in and out of content pieces, how to advertise those pieces. So everything is gamified still. It goes to that central idea. So those two pieces of artwork, Super Punch-Out for the SNES is my all-time favorite. This is what gaming is. And the demo disc of the PlayStation 2 this is what art is. That's my short answer.
Fair enough. So Charles, here's the follow-up. You mentioned the side-scrolling rules of side-scrolling. So video games have been around long enough to really start developing its own language, much like cinema does. Are you think we're coming to the age where we're going to start circumventing the traditional language of video games to discover what else is there? Is that going to be?
Oh yes, absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
So,
told you I had a good follow-up for you. But anyways.
Yeah. So when it comes to games, it's not just. Yeah, you're absolutely spot on when you say games have developed their own language over the years, much in the same way that cinema has, right? And I think art games play with this language not just by subverting expectations, but sometimes by using them to your advantage, right? So a good example of an art game that obeys this side-scrolling law would be Passage by Jason Rohrer. I think it's Jason Rohrer. It is Jason Rohrer, right? So it's just it's a very short game. It's free. Anybody who's listening to this, I encourage you, just go download it. But basically what you do is you walk to the right. And it doesn't tell you you're supposed to walk to the right. You just know because of sort of the language that the game conveys, right? With Journey, when you first start that game, there's a little camera pan up, right? And that's how you know, yes, I'm supposed to head in this direction toward that thing, right? Nobody tells you to. At least I don't remember anyone saying that you should. But you know you can move. You're supposed to move in that direction.
Yeah, you have to. You're pushed inertly. You're sort of nudged, like tongue in cheek.
And yes, there are other times when games break convention in order to really surprise the player or to do any other stuff. Undertale is famous for doing this now. Right, so the Sans boss fight became a meme in a lot of ways because of this, right? So he does stuff like attack you in the middle of a speech, or just straight up refusing to end his turn, and then you need to try to push your cursor towards the end turn button to do stuff like that to mess with your interface. But games that broke this convention are older than that, even. Eternal Darkness is the first game that I can think of for the GameCube.
I was gonna jump in with that one. That's top 25 for me. Eternal Darkness. Just the kill screen. You think people were smashing their GameCubes because they thought that the thing broke or bricked their GameCubes. Like there was a huge proto meme before this whole explosion of internet memery. that like the GameCube was pretty much the de facto console to troll people in its earliest launch title. So it's one of those things that's like predates a lot of our internet culture.
And one thing that only a few games have done so far that I've noticed that I absolutely love is sort of meta puzzle solving. A good example of this is One Shot, where over the course of a number of their puzzles, they do stuff like they change. One of them, I recall, very early on. So this isn't really much of a spoiler, but they change your desktop background. And what you're supposed to do is minimize the game and look at your desktop background in order to answer this this puzzle, right? And that's outside the game itself. It's really cool. It's even as simple as you can even use non-interactivity to imply meaning as well. So the best example I can think of at the top of my head is actually Depression Quest by Zoe Quinn. And that game represents the experience of depression by showing you a lot of alternate choices that are way healthier than what you're actually allowed to do, right? But they're always grayed out. You're never allowed to select, like, call a friend or go outside or whatever. And that represents how, for people who are depressed, sometimes you might even know what you're supposed to do, but you just can't work up the energy and the motivation to go out and do it, right?
I think
but
that
by showing you,
No, I think that's one of the truest forms of artwork that I think only games, to Josh's point, that's the only way that I feel games circumvent all of the conditions of movies and music and books, in that sort of way that the end user can see that, experience that, and then take from that everything that runs in their imagination, and then relate to that on so many different levels through so many different personalities. I think that's to Josh's point. I just wanted to point that out, Charles.
Yeah, sorry, my rambling.
No, Charles.
But
you never.
Interactivity, I think, is a very powerful axis, a very powerful tool. It has its own language of conventions that you can use to your games to advance your message, that you can subvert to create a new experience, or you can even use the lack of interactivity itself to convey a story in some way. And there are so many great examples of games that play with these conventions.
I think you helped me understand something. It's been in the back of my head for a long time, and now I think I understand it. The language of games is interaction, or lack thereof. That's the true language of it, right? No. Yeah, that's the true language, and that's where games are art, because art has a language. All art forms, it doesn't matter whether it's a sport, whether it's a video game, or anything in the middle you can think of. They all have their rules they all have their language of how they interact with the world. And with video games especially, it's all about interaction.
And the way that each of the games have their own way of breaking rules.
Yes.
And objectively allowing everyone to give their subjective opinion about what this means. So even reviews, as subjective as they are for games, are still only one person's opinion. There's a whole bunch of games that have been tanked by reviews but are just world renowned based off of their personality. A big thing for me is Myst, the Myst games.
Yes.
Series. That game was brought forth to me while I was working directly with a senior staff member, JD Alley. He was the main point of contact for Capcom USA. He unfortunately passed away. He was a very, very close mentor of mine. He worked on Fahrenheit. He worked on a whole bunch of different of these Quantic Dream pieces. So he had a very, very key way of looking at things, and he put me on to Myst. I'd already played it in the past, but he told me, play it this way, check it out this way. And I took that with me throughout my whole entire career, just those games as well, as being a point of whatever anyone's subjective opinion of something is going to be, there's always going to be the objectivity of the developer and design team of what they put forth to then everyone digest and give their own piece of time to this artwork. Because it's all about time.
Yes.
And do you mind if I say just like one thing to your audience?
Sure, go say whatever you'd like.
In my examples, I brought up a lot of indie games and art games because I've been spending a lot of time with them, right? This is sort of the environment that I love. But this language, ever played? Everyone would benefit from just taking a little time to be cognizant of the way AAA games even sort of bend these things to create a certain feeling or to get you to see things a certain way. And it doesn't even have to be, especially outlandish examples like the Psycho Mantis fight from a Metal Gear Solid, right? Although that is a very obvious example, right? It could even just be in the way games sometimes inhibit you, right? Like in Call of Duty, there are often sequences where your character has to move slowly, or you're reduced to having a handgun, right? Or even without a gun at all in Call of Duty Modern Warfare, right? And the idea is to give you this feeling of vulnerability when that happens, right? That kind of stuff. All games use this language. It's not just...
No.
And that was part one of my conversation with Vox Pop, Charles and Mark Anthony Rodriguez. Guys, this was a matter of, I learned so much, like especially this last part here. I never thought, I had some inkling of this, but Charles just put it to light for me very much about the idea of games, the language of games being interaction itself, which is just like, oh my god, I learned something. I think really profound. I still think this was a very cool conversation. Thanks guys so much. I'm just going to finish reading off something and we're just going to head to the end credits here. Part 2 will be up next week. The Vox Pop Games platform designed for primary benefit independent game developers, Let's Players, video game streaming personalities, but I've already said that. Users can sign up for exclusive platform news, follow all their social channels, and become a part of their Discord community at the following links: foxpopgames.net, https worldwideweb.linkedin.com/companies/foxpopgames. Their Discord link is going to be in the description of this episode. Definitely go there. Gamers have a voice, and Voxpop hears you loud and clear. Definitely check these guys out. These guys are amazing. Once again, guys, thanks very much. And part 2 will resume next week. And that will do it for this episode of Just Joshing. If you want to support the podcast, you can do so a number of different ways. You can subscribe to the podcast. I'm on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, many other platforms. Hit the subscribe button, listen, share, let people know I'm out there. My YouTube channel is Joshua Pantelleresco. If you want to listen to all my archived episodes, they're there. There's 294 and counting there, so definitely check them out. My books, The Watcher, Storm Dance, The Wandering God, are available through MiraclePublishing.com. I have a column at firstcomics.com, which I'll be updating tonight. Beyond all that, my Twitter and Instagram is at jpantelleresco. Definitely come say hi. Guys, stay inspired out there, and I'll talk to you next time.
Josh. Shush.